Hello there. Long time no see. How's it going? I'm back to talk about a wild week in Ireland. So I don't go live very often these days, but sometimes a lot happens at once. And this week was quite an eventful week, a mixed bag of tragedy, of borderline, actual civil unrest, presidential election that is on the brink of being illegitimate. We'll see how that goes. Connolly versus Humphreys versus spoiled vote, etc. We had Aisling Murphy's killer's family who conspired to cover up his murder and went to great lengths to do so, brought up on their charges and convicted to ultimately a short prison stay. And the exposure, I suppose, self-exposure of, I think it's Ryan Casey, if I'm not wrong, her boyfriend, who's kind of entered, I could say, nationalist politics, maybe. He's speaking up. He wrote an article for Gript, I think it was today. And we have had comments from Aisling's sister, Aisling Murphy's sister, tangential to some of the issues, you and I and most of the country, almost everybody is familiar with and talking about behind closed doors in some cases, but talking about nonetheless. So there's a lot going on, and I don't have a big PowerPoint sort of here's all the videos, here's a dramatic rerun of all the events. I'm just talking. I just want to go back over some points on it. Hi chat, welcome. Such a relief to see you there. And sort of what I mean by relief is comforting to see some of the heads there. But yeah, like it's Monday, so the well, let's just go back to it. Let's just look at a week in Ireland here. If we start with Citywest on Monday, so today is Friday. We start with, I'll just give you the initial. This is actually a BBC report. A man has appeared in court in Dublin charged with sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl who was in the care of the Irish Child and Family Agency, TUSLA, or TUSLA, as some people say. I don't know. The incident is alleged to have happened in the early hours of Monday morning, so it happened first thing on Monday morning. It wasn't a former old incident that had gone through investigation or something and led to charges. It had just happened. A 26-year-old man was charged with sexually assaulting the young girl in Sagart, County Dublin, blah, blah, blah. So that was the basic story we heard. And I suppose in a sense, TLDR, we'll get back to it in more detail. Citywest, Sagart went nuts. I'm having a cup of tea and a whiskey. It's Friday evening and I'm not out. So, I'm enjoying my life somewhat here with you. And Citywest went nuts, right? How do I say? In a sense, nothing new, nothing. Is it a rerun of Newtown, Mount Kennedy, and Ballyogan and Coolock and Dublin riots of 2022, whenever that was, 23? Kind of, but I do believe as well that this is, as they all are in their own time and moment, a little bit of an inflection point as well. It's got some details to it that make it stand out, because sometimes there is some issue, there's a problem, there's a center put in, people are giving out about it, it gets a bit spicy, the guards arrive, usual. The thing that would distinguish this for me, from my point of view, so none of it is normal, but it becomes normal. And the thing that would distinguish that from our newfound normality is how on the nose it is. Obviously, right? I'm not a politician, so I shouldn't have to do this stuff, but obviously, heart goes out to the girl and her family, genuinely, not like a blithe type of thing to say. We'll get into that, right? That'll be obvious. But with that said, the thing, just as an analyst and politically looking at it, commenting on it, kind of objectively, the thing that stands out about it is how on the nose the whole thing is to me. And I'll give you an example, because there's always an excuse for everything. Oh, well, that was just one guy, and that was this, and that was that, and that's no big deal, and you're picking something out that doesn't mean anything. That's the accusation. But it reminds me of, and I always go back to this, in Cork, in Carrigaline a few years ago. So, some of you will be sick of hearing me mention these sort of old anecdotes or stories from years gone by. In Cork, however many years ago it was, several years ago, I'm bad with dates and years, a boy called Adam in Cork was stabbed on the ground by some Africans, and they were shouting, "This N word is fucked." The boy was an Irish white kid, right? But they're saying, "Look at the blood, fam." They're using all this kind of London ebonics and laughing and hollering and all this, a fairly familiar scene. And he was getting stabbed on the ground, and that was that. And there was a big meta political battle about it, people talking about it, fundraiser for the boy was taken down, all this stuff, right? But the thing that critics said at the time to someone like me was that it wasn't a racial attack. And this was, I believe, in the wake after George Floyd in America, which they all protested about. They said that because he was white and the boys were black, and maybe some people would say, well, they were kind of acting in a mob-like, extremely violent way that people associate with the kind of black crime in America. That doesn't mean it was a racial crime. That doesn't mean it was a racial attack. Even though people feel like, well, don't tell me to not believe my lying eyes. I know what I see. They will say, yeah, but at the same time, it's just some boys attack some other boys, and these things do happen. And while it's a terrible, awful thing to happen, it's just some bad people attacked a victim, and that's it, right? And that's frustrating when they say that. A couple of weeks later, in Limerick, this was all in the wake of the George Floyd hype. A couple of weeks later in Limerick, a local boy, an Irish boy, I believe, a white boy anyway, he got on the wrong side of a black kid in the area, and they had a dispute online, and the white kid went to meet him and shake his hand and put it there and bury the hatchet, and the black kid beat him up intentionally on video to share it around, beat him up and started talking about 400 years of slavery and all this kind of stuff, introducing racial grievances and kicking him in the head, a off the dictionary version of a hate crime. And I said, look, a few weeks ago in Carrigaline, he said he didn't put it in black and white, pardon the pun, he didn't put it that way, so it's not a hate crime. And now I have one where he did. He said it in clear terms, right? It's a hate crime. And they just ignored it. And, I always said I'm going to keep that in the bank forever when they bring up hate crimes and stuff like that, because it is important sometimes when, it's crystal clear. This is one of those things, Citywest, where it couldn't be more crystal clear. It sounds like something that a Irish right-wing, far-right propagandist would make up, right? That's what it sounds like, because all the details are there. I'd prefer if it didn't happen, genuinely. I'd prefer if none of this were happening. But the point is to say that all of these denials, to say, oh, well, that was just one person, another, that's nothing, and crime happens all the time. Every aspect of it is there, because it was an asylum seeker, right? So it wasn't just a foreigner, it was an asylum seeker. And they are the key focus, of course, of the so-called far right, because they're very much not meant to be here. They're put up in hotels. They're forced into communities. It's the leading edge, tip of the spear of the worst of migration excesses. So he was an asylum seeker. Not only that, by the way, I'm a believer that all asylum seekers, bar a minuscule amount, are what anyone would consider fake, not genuine. People talk about real ones and fake ones. We're for the legitimate ones. There's no reason for a Somalian to be in Ireland on asylum, whether there is a war there or not. Never mind a Nigerian, never mind an Algerian. Oh, well, if there's genuinely a war, there's a war in Ukraine, but it's a big country, blah, blah. We know the arguments. It ought to be discarded entirely. But anyway, bear with me. He's an asylum seeker. But not only that, right? I believe it's pretty much all fake. It's all a sham. But even going by the government's own standards, their own ridiculous standards, their own ridiculously lax standards, they give leave to remain, asylum, B-top, I-pass, whatever, you name it. Sure, we'll let you in anyway, to almost any C word in the whole world, right? They have state-funded immigration lawyers and NGOs queuing up to give clemency for all these people. But even under those own rules, those very rules, he had been rejected. He had been rejected 6 months ago, and Jim O'Callaghan, the whole tough on migration minister that has been brought in, supposedly, he himself made a big hoopla, and they made a big hoopla for months about we deported 2 people in the last 4 months or whatever. And even with all that, he was a failed asylum seeker under their rules, and he was meant to be gone 6 months ago. And not only was he not gone, it would be one thing if he was meant to be gone, but they didn't physically drag him to an airport. I think they should. I think there should be much harsher ways of getting rid of pretty much all of these people. But it's worse because not only was he an asylum seeker, that was failed, that was still in the country. Were he to have been spending the last 6 months under a bridge or living in some sort of facility with some of his compatriots, wherever he was from, I believe Somalian, he was staying with Somalians, living off of their kindness, off the books, off the radar, in a squat somewhere, under a bridge somewhere. Okay, fine, you didn't physically escort him there because we live in this silly bureaucracy and, that's how it is. No. He was staying in their care under their spreadsheet of guest list, or their guest list spreadsheet, sorry. They have him on file. I don't know how many thousands stay at Citywest, but they have to get cleaning supplies. They have to get food. I mean, the Citywest facility, ran by this Miguel Elliott multimillionaire syndicate, effectively, right? I believe. I'm not sure who's sold it to who at this point, but ran effectively by millionaires for profit, right? They have to keep an accounting of who's in, who's out, because they have to feed them and care for them. They will even have sign in and out sheets for the place, right? They have to afford this person a certain amount of dole money or stipend or whatever it's called every week. That person will have their own needs. The guy was staying in their care, documented. They were paying his bed and board. I mean, that's not what we're led to believe. That what we were told by Jim O'Callaghan is if someone's deported, they're out and all this kind of stuff. That was the jargon. No, he had been there 6 months, sitting on his hole, getting fed in this place, in the middle of this community that never wanted him or anybody else in that center. And he was there, and he allegedly sexually assaulted this young girl. Now, we get to the other half of the equation. And of course, the obvious goes that we never knew who he was. This whole unvetted males thing. Yeah, he was obviously an unvetted male. Another one, they tried to gaslight us into believing that was somehow a myth or an exaggeration. It's completely true. We don't have any idea who these people are. That is not hyperbole. That's not demagoguery. That's not any of that. It's straight up undisputable fact. So this strange man who had been living 6 years on our dime, requested to leave 6 months ago, doesn't. Not only does he not leave, he's actually staying in a fucking hotel, pardon my language, on our dime, registered, known. You'd think the least they could do is effectively, on the day that they ask him to leave the country, at the very least, they have him pack his bags, go to the outer perimeter of Citywest and say, good luck, try finding a house, go on that, I don't know, do your thing, but you're in the wild now, maybe you just want to go home or something. But there's we're not going to actually give you money or give you a house or whatever. You would think that at the very least that would happen. No, they continue to keep this man. And then we get to the other side of it. The girl, a 10-year-old girl, who is, think of the symmetry of this, she is meant to be under state watch. She has been given, I believe, voluntarily from her parents because she, as Tusla seemed to enjoy saying in their statement, she had some behavioral issues, victim blaming. A 10-year-old child. She was meant to be in state care under this agency, which is rife with scandal and neglect and, losing track of children and the rest of it. That's another story, maybe. She was under their care. She absconded, as one does when you're looking after 10-year-olds. As far as I'm concerned, if I'm looking after children, they're not going anywhere, right? That's my job, right? If I'm doing that with my own 2 children, but if I, for whatever reason, I was looking after some other children, they don't just abscond, right? In the middle of O'Connell Street, I think it was. First off, don't even have them in there. It's like a taxi driver on steroids, Travis Bickle, horrendous place to be, right? But she went missing from them, disappeared off, and she ends up magically at Citywest. Now, here's where we get into speculation. In the end, she ends up allegedly sexually assaulted by this man, and he's now being charged. Her family have since come out, because sometimes you need to be wary of these things. You don't want a story to end up being a storm in a teacup. Oh, it turns out nothing really happened. We were all talking about it like it did. Egg on the face, some sort of shit-stirring troublemakers based on a fake story. You don't want to do that, right? So there have been multiple people who claim, at least, I assume they are, to be her family members, coming out and talking about how it's a harrowing time for them, yada yada, etc. I mean, not to be dismissive, but you know what I mean. They'll give a 2-3 minute video talking in detail about, it's a hard time for us, and they'll say the country needs to change and all of that kind of stuff. Now, I don't think her family would be, or her family members would be putting up those videos if they weren't familiar and intimately familiar enough with the situation to know that something genuinely did happen, right? Also, he was charged. So something bad happened, right? Someone in the chat just mentioned Ezra Levant. Let me just make a note. We'll get to that later, right? But she's in Tusla care. She's a troubled child, maybe autistic, maybe not, either way. Now, here's where I depart from what actually happened. I'm not so much commenting necessarily on the case. We'll copy and paste this case into a hypothetical other box here, right? And sort of speculate on, given that we don't know what might have happened in a case like this, a case equal to this, similar in every regard. Maybe not this case exactly, because of course I don't know. We have 2 worlds colliding, basically, from the state. One of which they're meant to be caring for this Irish girl. Another, they're meant to have, they are running this scam system, migration system, right? Asylum thing. The allegation from people like me and you and many others about this asylum stuff for years has been that you're putting, let's say we're in Moville, Donegal, small area, small town. You're putting whatever it is, 100 men into this defunct hotel in the middle of our town, and they're from Algeria and they're from Albania, and they are vagabond, drifter, opportunists, men, fighting age males. True though. They are between the age of 18 and probably 35 for the most part, right? They're men. Now, there's just some sort of home truths that what did they call it? Morgoth, if you're not familiar, a great author, writer, YouTuber type of guy, commentator. I came up with this idea of the hatchling, the whole idea of someone who debates with you in poor faith, bad faith intentionally, and what they do is they pretend not to understand things that we all understand, and they try to put you in a position of explaining things that we all already know and twist you up in knots and sort of try to obfuscate the reality through doing that. And you get a lot of that with this stuff. When you say that these things are inevitable, they say, why? We're all just people. We're all just people. And like with any people or any circumstance or any context, all people are just people, blank slates, blank units. And yes, crimes get committed, but they just get committed in sort of this vacuum. Like there's a certain set proportion per thousand of population or whatever that might do a bad thing, and when that happens, we need to charge them. But you can't say any more than that about any scenario. Well, let's get away from the hatchlings and talk about reality for a second. The reality is they talk about men, right? The sort of feminist bull ring, like college student type of people, right? They say it's not migrants, it's men. Men commit most of this, men commit most sexual assaults, etc. And the thing is that that's true, right? Men do that, obviously. They are guilty of the majority of sexual assaults and violent crimes and all the rest of it. Men are. Why? Do you want to be a spurg and get into all sorts of evolutionary psychology and all that? Skip over that, right? Men have a tendency towards these things at greater numbers than women. So if we want to look at it that way, yeah, sure. Men can present a danger to women, to children. There's a reason why, hey, if I drop my kid to a play center or something, I'd rather if it was all women there and not all men, right? Do I believe all those men are predators? Probably not, right? Chances are they're not, but we're looking at the odds here, right? Anyway, see, I'm falling into the hatchling. I'm explaining something we all know. This is the idea, right? Now, what's more dangerous than just men full stop in an abstract 1 in 5,000 kind of way? What's more dangerous? A bunch of sailors, for example, a bunch of soldiers, a big football team on tour, etc. We know that, right? Call it misogyny. Does it need to be beaten out of men? Is it natural? Is it ingrained? Skip over that, right? That's how it is. It increases when it's in some sort of institutionalized large group setting of men who are part of some sort of squad, right? Sailors, especially, and again, the key detail here among all these analogies, when they're sort of isolated among themselves, they're not part of an organic structure, an organic family, an organic community, an organic nation, an organic social structure, an organic religious hierarchy and community, whatever it happens to be. When they're in their own little travel pod or gang or whatever you want to call it, they become more dangerous. Does that mean they're all predators? Absolutely not. Does it mean that there's even one predator among a certain group? Absolutely not at all, right? These are very abstract, large number generalities. These are heuristics. Now, if you brought 50 Crocodile Dundee white Australian men to live in your small town between the age of 20 and 35, would you expect there to be a greater risk of perhaps grooming, of, well, we'll start with just fraternization with women, right? Naturally, why wouldn't they, right? Go down to a bar, try their luck, this, that, and the other. Schmooze, charm, right? That's life. But is there a chance that could bleed into maybe drunkenness, predatory behavior, loutish abuse, and get into even the darker stuff, right? Could that happen? Is the risk of that way up with all these 50 Australian men coming in? Even though most of them are fine, the risk is up, right? Because it's unnatural. Why would you have 50 to 100 Australian men staying in a hotel between the ages of 20 and 35? That's just bad news. That doesn't fit with the community. And we all know, men, that environment, that context is just totally off the wall. It's unnatural. They're not from here. We don't know them. All of that. So that's true, as is. Now you make those men, it's not 50 men who are here on a farming exchange thing, where there's 100 Australian outback farmers who are here to learn about a different climate, different soils, or something like that. Well, they are, people who are here for a reason. They come from probably a decent background, to have traveled the world with this kind of ambition and putting in the work in a college or some agricultural college. Again, that would make it a lot different. You'd be like, well, that's not so bad, right? I suppose, given the context, because context is everything. Now, on the other hand, you bring in thousands of opportunist random men with no background from countries such as Algeria, Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, Nigeria, right? Now, I put into, again, another one. Let's go anti-hatchling mode here and let's just talk about what we all know. The following is what we all know, but I put it into ChatGPT just to see what does the kind of hive mind of the internet base of knowledge say back to me here. And I said, just to clarify what's already common sense, I said, if a woman in Somalia, where I believe this man is from, in Citywest, if you were in Somalia, if you were in Mogadishu, if a Western woman, a white woman, walked around Mogadishu or somewhere else in Somalia in tight shorts and a string top, like a short cut top or whatever, a tight or small top, revealing clothes basically, which wouldn't be uncommon in Ireland. Say what you want about that, but women wear them on a warm day, they wear them for exercise, whatever. People have their own views. That's a whole other story on modesty and dress and freedom and whatever. But as it is, that's not an uncommon way for women to dress in quite revealing clothes in the West. Some choose to do that, right? Say what you will, that is how it is. What if a woman in Mogadishu, a white Western woman who you might see, going to the gym, going for a run, whatever, just dressing the way she wants to dress. What if she was in Mogadishu and she decided to dress that same way and she walked around, and what I said to ChatGPT, just to see what it thought, what if she walked around and she wasn't in some sort of green zone area, some sort of diplomat area with friendly security forces there to rescue her, protect her? And what if she wasn't in an area like that? She was downtown, And what if, even if one of the crowd in the street, one nice guy, decided to say, please get in here, let me throw this blanket over you, I'm trying to save you, or whatever. What if she said, no, I just want to dress the way I want to dress. I insist I'm going to walk down the street. I think I'm entitled to do that. What would happen to her in that scenario? What are the odds that she would be beaten, raped, and or killed? Any or all of the above. And ChatGPT refused to answer me directly. I asked for a percentage chance. It said, there's no way of knowing that. It's a sensitive subject. And I just said, look, hazard a guess. I pressed it. It wouldn't give me a percentage, understandably. There's no data for a hypothetical like that. But what it said was that she would be substantial. The risk would be substantial, very likely, and she would be in extreme danger, right? If she dressed that way. Now, that's not because of Somalian soil, the study the dust of the land or whatever. That's because that's the way overall, not every single person, that's the way overall those people are, that they would react like that because that they have that view of sexual entitlement, of modesty, of hierarchy, whatever. They have that idea, they have that nature, that's just the way it is, right, with Somalians. And it doesn't stop when they get on a flight to, let's just say, Dublin. Doesn't stop, right? The odds, again, we're talking about context. We're not talking about every single person, but the odds, the context matters. And if you bring a pack of Somalians with no background, no knowledge, they're not here to be doctors, and that's another story, whether you're for or against that, but they're just some guy who arrived with a bag who's 27 years old or whatever, and he's willing to lie through his teeth, say whatever he's got to say, arrive at this foreign land, shorn of his family, of his context, his background, his culture, his friends, any of that kind of stuff, and just arrive to be an opportunist, to avail of economic advantages and stuff like that. Basically get handed a gaff eventually, right? You're also dealing with a world where with social, and this is another subtopic, right? But it's obviously related. The pornification of Western white women, right? Now, most of that is not real, right? We have a libertine attitude towards sexual mores and freedom to date who you want and whatever, and dress in revealing clothes and whatever. That's how it is. But it's not like it is on pornography or on, what's it called? Playboy or whatever, right? Whereas we all know from the whole Bob's and Vagana meme and all of that. I've known a lot of women who've been to India and places like that who've all sorts of stories, right? You won't get a woman back from India or one of these countries that doesn't have stories, right? Of being perved on a lot, right? Commonly, almost routinely. The whole idea of this kind of Bob's and Vegana stuff, right? The demented comment sections when it comes to these white women. When they're over there, they'll get followed, stared at, stalked, harassed. I have a story that just totally confirms my point, but it's too vile to actually tell, right? There's one in particular, but I won't. You can fill in the gaps for yourself, imagine. Or don't. But so that's what you have as well. It's not just that they're coming over here with all the previous context I mentioned, but they're coming over here, a lot of them with a preconception of white women that you can just, it's like you can just go ficky with the white woman who we sort of glorify from the TV and have sexual fantasies about and all this kind of stuff, right? That's just a reality. Again, some people would want to dance about that in a polite society, but it's like we all kind of know that that's an element. Someone laughs at me for saying Playboy, I'm aging myself. Well, I'm 34, you know what I mean? I did mention online as well, or whatever it is, right? Do you know what I mean? I'm just saying whatever it is, whether it's some old magazine or what they're watching on the internet or whatever, they're seeing this thing projected at them, right? Effectively Pamela Anderson showing my age again, or whatever today's equivalent of that is on TikTok or whatever, you know, you name it. That's what they're seeing. But in reality, as you know, you don't just, you know, it's not just some sort of candy shop where you just get to, they're all like, they all just want to hang out. And it's like, you know, some sort of like teenage boys fantasy or whatever. It's not like that. Do you know what I mean? And maybe the fact that a lot of people arrive with that sort of fantasy pumped into their head and they come from this modesty culture and the rest of it, that leads to a sort of a dangerous mentality arriving over here. And you're not getting, again, their most sage, noble man of the town coming here, who is deeply embedded with his community in that country, a patriot of his own country, a religious, you know, stalwart or any of that kind of stuff. You're getting a lot of dodge, right? And these sort of footloose or, you know, vagrant type people, opportunists. Anyway, all that baggage. And then they come here to Ireland in big numbers and they arrive at a big hotel complex where they have a lot of stuff done for them. It's basically like a military barracks, like a good quality military barracks with a lot of, and of course, the other thing a hatchling will say, there's women and children too, a few. They're segmented into different areas to keep themselves safe from those migrant men. But in a lot of places, I mean, we're not, again, believing your lying eyes type of thing. We all see the images of people coming out. We don't see a lot of women in buggies, hordes of them. You might see one, of course, some exist. This is the hatchling thing. But what we see is big groups of men who are 30 odd years old, strolling around, smoking cigarettes. You know, they're men. It's all young men. Nearly all. And what environment does that create inside in that place? A lot of them will be connected to various types of organized crime. They have you'd be ashamed of your life if the community, the village, the people you went to school with saw it, any of that stuff. They've no reason to. It's like when people go off to war in other countries and they're just there to sort of, you know, when they're there, they don't give a fuck, you know, about anything. They sort of develop this we'll do what we want thing. Who cares, right? We're free. We can do whatever we want. There's that kind of attitude. And they're with each other, and that sort of compounds and compounds and compounds in a center like this, in a place like this. A bunch of young men. What do young men of any description, when they call it locker room talk, a bunch of 25-year-olds who are together all the time, like a boys' school or that type of attitude, what do they talk about? What do they think about? What do they hype each other up on? Girls, women, right? It gets gross. It gets out, you know, it's sort of like, it's lad stuff run amok, right? And this is a bunch of foreign men from these places. You heard about Lara Logan, right? The American slash South African journalist. When she was in Egypt, I believe, she was documenting like the Arab Spring or something. She got caught up in a crowd of Egyptian men, and they sexually assaulted her by the hundreds. She was kind of mobbed and dragged through a crowd like a I don't know, like a bag of bread or something that had been dropped to starving people or whatever, that they all just started tugging at her and pulling her, right, and grabbing at her and groping at her. It wasn't even like a sexual assault of one person on another or something. It was just a whole crowd just grabbing her. And she was, I believe, injured, had to be in hospital. Let's not get into all sorts of details, but they were all just, there was hundreds of people trying to grab at her, feel her up, right, and do whatever to her. That's a crowd of hundreds of people. You know, people would say, "Oh, well, there was a sexual assault happened from a man in Donegal or whatever." Yeah, these things are terrible. If we could prevent them, it would be great. And in any circumstance where we can, we should. But you're not going to get hundreds of men. You know, this is all needless to say. You have men from that context in that hotel in huge numbers with each other, marinating among themselves, and they're not sending their best, right? And what are they going to be doing? Looking for women, right? Now, maybe one of them is Lothario. Maybe he's the most handsome man ever born, right? And he's charming or something, and he's rich. Somehow he's got loads of money. I don't know. Maybe one of them can hook up with a girl or something, right? He'll be the talk of the center. But most of them won't. That's the tragedy for men. You know what I mean? You go on Tinder and the girls get all swipes and the men don't, unless you're Leonardo DiCaprio, right? So it's the general tale is that it's nothing but woe, rejection, goes nowhere. You leave the center and you go for a walk, and this knockout girl on a jog walks by or runs by, and you ask her for the time, and you try to say, and she just goes ew and walks away, right? That's what these guys are going to. If some Irish lad is going to get that, some spoofer from the center is going to get that 50 times harder, right? And that's with a grown woman, 25 years old or whatever. It's not the fairy tale it turned out to be. Well, maybe they start to go fishing around. Maybe they go online. Maybe they go on Facebook. They go on Tinder. They go on Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. And that's the other thing that troubles me a lot. We talk about online safety for underagers, girls. I mean, this is applicable to everybody, whether it's Irish predators, anybody else, but this is a situation where they are warehoused, and all the previous context I've mentioned, just stack that all up, you know what I mean? I'm not going to keep referring back to it. Stack up all that context. Lara Logan, Indians, where they live, stack all that up, right? You know, what are they online? There is basically this sort of open, because if it was 40 years ago, they would have no way of communicating even with a single girl ever, right? All the townspeople would be wary. I mean, this wouldn't be happening. But with the internet, you have this relatively free-flowing line of communication that can exist between any one of them and a lot of, I mean, women in general, perhaps, but here we're obviously talking about vulnerable, naive, impressionable underage girls. Isn't that the target, right? Logically. But the other thing, key detail that ties that in, is these men very often are from cultures. I mean, this is to what I've already mentioned. They are from cultures where the age of consent thing isn't really relevant, right? They don't have that so much. It could be to do with the onset of puberty, you know, and all that, as opposed to 18 and the like fairly line drawn in the sand rules we have in the West. They don't really have that. They don't really respect that. The other thing too is consent, as we always hear about. it's not even that much of a norm. Like, we have this whole thing that if a woman, according to them, by their logic, if a woman is going around dressed like, and I'm going to use harsh language here, I'm not applying it to anyone, I'm just getting into their heads, right? The culture that they come from. If a woman is going around dressed like a whore, acting like a whore, then it's fair game to treat her like a whore. That is basically the mindset. That I said I'm just going to be kind of real about it. That's how they think about it. We're more gallant in the West, right? We don't see it that way. Some people might, but we don't accept that, right? We don't accept that. That's not tolerated. But that's how they see it. So a bit more, maybe not every person, but that's how it's commonly seen in these cultures. And so if they're not so pressed about age of consent, and they're not so pressed about respect or consent, or the inherent dignity and value of a human being, as opposed to just a sexual object, so they don't really have those things going on. And then they have the access to the internet, and they can just go online. And I don't know what the rules are on TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff, but as with all, I mean, look, we were all kids where, like, you know, if any website, if GTA Vice City told you weren't meant to play it when you were 18, well, you played it anyway, right? There's a ways and a means, and it is what it is, right? So I don't know what kind of safety mechanisms are there, either via the platforms or via the devices or the parents. But at the end of the day, kids are online, right? They're online. They obviously can get around everything. They're online. And what you will have is a certain amount of young girls are vulnerable, and they don't have parents who have stringent phone device safety stuff. They've had a device in their hand from the crib, right? And their parents don't watch them. Their parents might drink a bit. The kid might be troubled. The parents themselves might be troubled. The kid has as good open internet access as you and me, right? And they are vulnerable and seeking attention, as teenagers tend to do, right? They all seek attention. They all have identity crisis. And with girls, very often they could try to sort of get attention in that way, right? That's just one of those things. It's not universal, but like, especially with vulnerable, not well looked after or parented or guided kids, they could lean into that as a effectively like a cry for attention or a cry for something. And if they have open access to the internet, they can be on, you name it, platform, and they can be, you know, doing what grown women do, prattling around, showing themselves off or whatever. I assume that shit is going on, and these guys are also online. Not a good recipe. They can make contact, and not only that, they can organize it. They can communicate to each other, the asylum seekers, right? These people, these foreign men staying there, marinating among themselves in their own frustration. They also, the other thing that happens from asylum seekers is mass scale, like prostitution, human and drug trafficking. These systems are almost like littered with this, right? It's not just an odd thing that happens. They are the asylum system is almost defined by trafficking, corruption, abuse, labor, sex, and drug trafficking, right? Because it's perfect. I mean, just think about it. You have this unwatched system of subsidized migrants who can just come in and out and live for free. That's a pimp's dream, right? Now, so those lads can network. It doesn't just have to be one errant man who's a predator or who's online, who's found access to this young one online in some platform and starts communicating to her. It doesn't just have to be, that's bad enough. But there could even be networks, right? They form networks. They form grooming networks, grooming gangs. And they start making lists and sort of organizing it, right? From predator to victim, or predators to victims at larger scale. a friend of mine, Kelly, once told me that I wonder if she said, anyway, someone told me, right, that the asylum center near them was known locally as the Park and Ride, right? Park and Ride. Park and Ride, obviously, where you get the bus, and never mind. They called it Park and Ride, joking name for it, because it was known as a hub for prostitution, right? So if it's a hub for prostitution, it's a hub for drugs. It's a hub for fucking anything shady, right? And we all know that these vulnerable young ones exist. We know that the internet exists. We know that these guys exist. You smash all that context together. If I'm going on too much, let me just obviously cut to the chase. Is that we have all known through common sense, by seeing all this happen, that this stuff is inevitable. And by inevitable, I don't mean something like this was always going to happen, which is another rhetorical mistake. It's not that something like this was always going to happen. This is happening all the time, right? We just found out about this one. This one just got out. And the details are what they are. The details paint a caricature of what I would have been speculating about for years, or that was my theory. This is what's going on. Here's all these reasons why. This was like a caricature example of that, because every detail is there, right? But it's not that it was waiting to happen. Well, it happened a week before in some other center, and it happened 2 days before that in some other center, and some other center. We just don't know about it, right? Like tip of the iceberg is what I'm saying. You find out about a certain amount, you'd be amazed what gets covered up by cowardice, corruption. We saw it with Rotherham and Rochdale and all this, the grooming gang scandal. The whole reason this got by for so long, and probably continues to over there even, is because everybody wanted to look the other way. It was politically inconvenient and all the rest of it. Now, these asylum centers are rife, like I say, with prostitution, drug trafficking. The people running them are basically gangsters, as far as I'm concerned. These gombeans and all of that, they're gangsters, nothing more. Literal, like Tony Soprano tier gangsters, right? So and then the government above them are effectively gangsters as well, and whoever's above them. So all the way down to the person working in the facility who's doing the entry, exit, security, or whatever, is looking the other way. Or, as I speculated to someone I was speaking to a few days ago, I said, you know, by the way, if they traffic girls into these centers, those girls will be used. I hate to use language like this. It's all very uncomfortable subject, right, to speak about, and I don't want to sound flippant, but to be used by these predators. And someone would say, well, how do they get in? How do they get past security, or someone working there, some authority figure? Isn't there an Irish person, an Irish mammy, or a responsible person like you or me standing there watching it? There's not, actually, because the security guard himself is some Indian or some Somalian or someone who is literally staying at the center. I said that to someone in real life a couple of days ago, just in conversation about this. Well, it turns out, speculation or rumor, I'm not sure totally to be verified, it's been reported online that this man may himself have been working in security for the site. Maybe that's totally not true. Take it with a pinch of salt. But like I say, that was my theory anyway. I was saying, I wouldn't be at all surprised if, and I went further. I said, not only would the security guard not intervene the way you or I would go, whoa, where's she going, right? What's going on here? Like, let's just bust all this open right now. I was saying, not only would that security guard not intervene, he might be a compatriot, right, or whatever. Maybe he'd say, my turn, right? My turn. I'll give you a 50, or I'll buy her a phone as well, or I'll give her money for whatever the deal is, some sort of grooming thing or whatever. But they get involved, right? There is no responsible actor involved. It's just through and through. I could go on and on. And then we get to Tusla, right? Now, I don't know a whole ton about them, but we have this case of Muhammad, whatever the fuck, right? If you want the story, hit me up in the comments after, and I'll get it for you, or you can probably find it. And this is just one of tons of stories like this, where you think Tusla is a state agency where it's a bunch of people like your mother, your sister, you yourself, your teacher that you grew up with, or, you know, something like that. The kind of person at the helm dealing with things that you know would not let things past them and act in an Irish way, right? That you think, yeah, well, basically you think Ireland is Ireland, that in your mind, but actually there's a whole subterranean world of absolute filth. Last Trugel mentions the UCD report. I'll get to that. But there's a whole world of filth, and we have Tesla. This was really a bother for me, right? That the state is so overflowed, and everything is so depersonalized. Like we used to have the ESB and all that. Now it's just all these private contractors, and energy rates have gone up because everything is a contract to someone else. You used to have. I always talk about Jackie, who works in your office, who used to be the cleaner. She worked there for 30 years. If you had a break, if a girl in the office had a breakup, she'd bawl crying at work, and she'd sit there and have a DMC with Jackie, and they all really get on, and there's a class difference and a wage difference, but they get on and they respect each other. Now you have Sodexo, it's just contract workers, migrant workers, lowest common denominator. Everything's a contract. And you even find that with things like Tesla, because you think, well, not for them. They must have really responsible, like lifelong hire, real dedicated people with degrees and all the rest of it. And you know what I mean? Responsible hierarchy there. But it turns out that no, Tesla hire out the state care in a lot of cases to these private things, companies, whatever you call them. One of them is run by Mohammed, whatever the fuck, or something like that. An African. No, it's not a Mohammed, it's an African. And he is basically, as far as I'm concerned, like a gangster, opportunist, grifter, who has been in Ireland for a couple of decades and got in on the racket, because all these things are rackets, state-funded contracts for caring for children. And his care company, you couldn't make it up, was called Good People Limited. I think it might still exist. And it operates basically looking after kids, so-called, or teenagers, who are meant to be like basically, what's the word? Lost children or whatever, you know what I mean? They're not obviously with their parents. And so chat here is telling me they contract to special emergency arrangements, SEAs. And that's the thing, it's SEAs, it's BTOPs, it's this, it's that, it's the other. I gave up a long time ago trying to follow these things in forensic detail. You get good stuff from Nick Delahanty and all these people on it, and like people have to do it, and it's worthy, right? We obviously need it. But I just kind of got sick of it. There's so much of this. I'm at the point where I just go, let's just talk about it as it is and skip over the jargon. But for this, it's SEAs, right? So it's some bullshit. And basically the kids are given to this African guy who runs the company with his like family. He's the CEO, the wife is the director, the nephew is the sub-director, whatever. Basically a little cartel, right? Is what I would call it. And they look after these wayward kids and teenagers, or abandoned, or whatever it happens to be. And this is my speculation, is that it's some shitty rental somewhere, or they buy a property and they give them sliced pan and a bit of food, and they have a telly on and a PlayStation and an Xbox, and there's like 8 kids living in this house, and then there's one guy staying there. This is my speculation. I don't know anything, right? I'm imagining it. And there is perhaps one Indian or African or whatever, who is their special care executive assistant or whatever, some term, right? An SEFI2 or whatever, right? And they're meant to be, we give them sensory play and we give them all this, but in reality, they're in some fucking dingy house. They're being given toast, playing the Xbox. Half of them are smoking fags out the back, and they're getting into fights and they're whatever. And the person who's caring for them, like a lot of, let's be real, I love Africans for their lovely culture and bit of crack, right? Isn't that great? But a common, let's say, developing world thing is, as Giant Bandari said about India, a nation of 1.4 billion castes, right? Every man for himself, everything an opportunity to scam the next guy. They are working that so-called job, but they are the proverbial guy sitting there with the magazine over their eyes, dozing off. Or they say, I'm actually going home for a few hours. You can look after yourselves. That's just the impression I get. Maybe that's not good people care at all, right? But that's just about other thing. Not good people care, but another thing like it, maybe in my imagination. That would be kind of what you're seeing. I know someone who works in elder care, right? and they told me an anecdote. It's no one in specific, right? They told me an anecdote of a person, an African lady who was meant to be caring, like one of these, you come into the house for 2 hours and you mind or care or watch over or talk to or whatever, an old person, right? Um, and it was the elderly Irish person was being visited by this African woman, and what the African woman would do, and this was found out and reported to management, and I'd say probably nothing was really done about it after, but what the African woman would do is show up to the woman's house. She would put on the TV, Chromecast or whatever. She would put on the TV African evangelism shite, like TB Joshua or something like that, if you're familiar with it. Turn it up real loud, sit back and watch it start eating, right? And then she would get the old lady to go make her a sandwich. Now, it sounds like almost funny. It's obviously not. That's what she was doing, completely just taking the piss, no seriousness about the job, no dignity of like, I really take the work seriously. I go over there and I have a real chat and we've done the old lady's old favorite music. And obviously it's easier to stare into your phone, but no, if I'm going to be paid to do it, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do my job right. It doesn't even matter about the money. It's just a decency thing. It's like the difference between a shopkeeper who just idly scans your thing and someone who makes a bit of chit chat with you. You know, that warmth versus that complete apathy, right? That complete apathy. And that's what I sense in some of these SEA care home type of things for kids, right? That they're basically living feral and they're not being minded, and it's just one big absolute grift. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was other forms of crime involved. Now, with this good people care, if you think I'm making it all up or getting wild ideas, they were found that almost all of their vetting things, Garda vetting, obviously, which you'd have to have, were fraudulent. And they got a slap on the wrist and not much to it. Turns out those were all fraudulent. So the whole thing is fraudulent. I mean, that should be, if I feel like if I did that, I'd surely be hung for that, right? But apparently when you're in this grift, when you're one of those gangsters, it's moved on from, right? The whole thing dodgy. And that's the care they're in. Now, to my point, about the asylum center, how this girl gets in. We're painting a picture of what happens with a situation like this. So this is what everyone's missing. And by the way, this good people care or whatever, again, this didn't just happen one instance in Citywest. This good people care isn't just one errant bad company. Lessons learned, as the chat says. No, it's typical. That's how it works, right? And the idea that it's found out by the authorities and they step in and say lessons learned, they didn't find anything out. They know, right? If I can just walk up and down O'Connell Street and walk around a couple of towns in Ireland and pay attention to a couple of news stories and see a few videos here and there and just get a smell off the country and just kind of see things and go, I know what's going on in this country. I just know. And I don't even have like special access to the inner world of all this stuff. But I think it's abundantly clear to me what's happening. A few stories I hear, that kind of thing. Well, if I know, then Tosla know. And the department of whatever the fuck knows. And the person at the door, they all know, right? They all know the taxis are arriving with the young girls in them and they're going in. And it happens regularly. They know. So when one of these things comes out, good people care has been found out to not have vetting and the girls are arriving and this and that and the other. They all know, right? It's known top to bottom. Right. And there's just a structure, an incentive structure, a greed structure, a look the other way structure in place that we just don't hear about it. It's just radio silence. And that's just how it is. And you'd be amazed. It's like with conspiracy theories. I don't think they'd be able to do that. Too many people would tell the media, they'd report it. Well, those are dead ends in most cases, right? That's the trick, right? There is no NGO. You report it to HR, they say, okay, we'll take your mess concern very seriously. Nothing never happens, right? Because it's built into the structure. It's meant to be happening in effect, right? And that's where the problem lies. When people say a girl got assaulted, well, another girl got assaulted in Cork last week and he was a white Irish guy or whatever. And it was just like a random thing that happened, some inter-family thing or something, and these things are terrible, but you're going, yeah, but that's not like a sort of a human trafficking industry that's ran top to bottom by the state, right? The only thing, and I hate to be like anti-Catholic kind of thing or whatever, because a lot of, people think it's beating a dead horse or whatever, but the clerical abuse, right, in Ireland, which obviously was real. It's like the equivalent of saying, because one of these people will say, I'm making all this up, right? A terrible incident happened at Citywest, but that's all it is, an incident, right? One incident, one bad person did something to another person. What can we do about that, right? That's just life. I mean, bad things happen in society. We don't have pre-crime prevention, we can't know. But that's not what it's about. It's not about an incident. It's not at all. And the closest reference point is the clerical abuse in Ireland, let's say, which we all can understand this way of thinking, right? Because we've all had it drummed into us in the last 20 years, right? So, and it was real, obviously, and we know what led to it, what sort of culture. 1950, you're a person living in Bally, whatever, somewhere in Ireland, and you go, that priest, I'm telling you, I don't trust him at all, and I don't trust a lot of them, actually. And I think they all know full well. I don't think it's one incident. I think this is known, and it's not universal, but it's not rare, and it's happening, and everybody's turning a blind eye. And I believe it's industrial. I think one of them knows the other one, and they've even got a thing going on, and they're abusing these people on at scale, right? They're abusing a lot of kids around this community, and a lot of this is going on. And then, of course, you get given the taboo stuff. Now you're the bad guy or whatever. But imagine if some prick comes up to you in 1950, right? You have every bit of circumstantial evidence. You have even hard evidence. You have numerical evidence. You have all the evidence, really. But they still try to come back to you and say, well, where's your evidence for the overall theory? Because all I see is maybe one incident here and maybe one incident there. But where does it say, where's the report from the police for all these sexual assaults? And you go, they don't exist, for fuck's sake, right? Obviously, because the police are in bed with the fucking church, which is in bed with the government, which is in bed with all the local gambins and all the rest of it, and it's a network thing. But that doesn't make it any less real. In fact, that makes it more horrendous because it's an industrial scale, covered up, institutional crisis, right? As opposed to, well, one priest did one thing to one kid somewhere and he should be held accountable. But I mean, that's it. That's the problem. It isn't an incident. It's the nature of the entire thing. And when they say, well, where's your proof of the entire thing? That's the problem, right? That's the problem, is that it's happening. And even when it happens in real time in front of us, they still try to deny it. And we get back to the specific case. The girl arrives from town, Dublin, out to Citywest, which is a bit of a distance. And again, we don't know all the details, but we can speculate, right? Now, the big question and the big denial, the big misleading thing is about this incident. An incident happened. It's not at all. And if there wasn't a clerical abuse circa 1950 style industrial mass scale cover-up of this human trafficking and abuse going on, if there wasn't a cover-up, then surely the first question from the regime wouldn't be, oh, well, this needs to be investigated and that man needs to be brought to trial and whatever. No, the question would be, hold on a second. If she was in O'Connell Street or somewhere with Tusla and she disappeared and then she pops up later that day, all the way out there in Citywest. Now, I don't know, was she actually on the grounds or we don't know. I don't know. But how does that happen? What's going on? Basically, the basic question of what's going on there? What's that about, right? And then instead of seizing Phil Dwyer's phone, right? Phil Dwyer, who was reporting on all of this stuff at the time recently, and he had his phone seized by the guards and they want to take the phone because they want to examine the footage because a couple of young fellas burnt out a fucking shitty van, right? Which, who cares? As in, like, we condemn all this stuff or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, in grand scheme of things, it's a van. Nobody was hurt. It'll be written off as an expense. The thing, that's a whole other thing, right? Terrible, and we condemn it. But no one was hurt. Relatively small potatoes. And apparently that's the biggest deal of the whole world, right? A van got burned out. A van that was probably intentionally left there to be burned out anyway. I digress. But they seize his phone because there might be evidence of who exactly held the hammer and smashed the window and threw a match into this empty van. And it's such a big deal, we need to take a phone and make a big spectacle of it. A phone for the video that Phil took, the video that he live streamed to the whole fucking 6-8 billion people in the whole world. That's there for them to watch all they want. But they need his device and all this, right? Well, What about what's on this man's device? Who is he? What's on his device, and who is he texting, and who are the other guys texting, and what's going on? Like I say, this stuff is intentionally ignored. If you even cared halfway, you would take a couple of these cases, you would lead it back, and mark my words, there's Irish people involved, Irish gambins, gangsters involved with a lot of this stuff. You often see they've been investigated by CAB, or they're just full-on criminals. Like I don't want to use harsh language. They're not the best. They're our own dregs, right? Or they're high-class dregs. They're high-class gangsters. But either way, they don't give a fuck about anyone. They would have 20 people on a mushroom farm working for slave wages, probably getting smacked if they stop working after 14 hours and all this, because there's a rush. It's the seasonal rush or whatever. And that level of gangsterism and abuse, right? Like Roman tier levels of gross, nasty exploitation and power. That's what these people think like, right? And they'll do anything for money. They don't understand the idea of morality. They're totally amoral, and it is just about money and power for these people, these local gambins and stuff. They'll do anything. We had the guard a few years ago who was allegedly in a scam with a Pakistani fixer, unnamed, the guard himself sort of unnamed. It was reported that he was in a scam with a Pakistani fixer to bring hundreds. He was, over the years, he'd stamped forms for hundreds of Indians and Pakistanis, which would give them the right to come here and work and get benefits. And he had done that. Now, it was suspected, it was in the paper and everything. They didn't bring him up on it, but the papers knew enough, and enough guards, good guards maybe, had reported it, that it was something that seemed to be common knowledge among anyone who was paying attention to it, on the brink of being a scandal, basically. Well understood and known, not some fringe theory, right? It was in like the Irish Independent a couple of times. At the time, it was about a guard in somewhere in Leitrim or wherever. And then it disappeared a bit. And then a few years later, the guard came up, and it turned out he'd been going around to migrant women in the area and harassing them and sexually assaulting them. Now, these are probably, we're speculating about a different person, right? I don't know. But the guard was then named, and the article said that this is the man who formerly was believed to have been involved in this scam. And so he sort of, that had gone away, and then it came back up for the sexual assault, which he did get done for, and he got 6 months or a year in jail or whatever. And but he's sexually harassing and assaulting and just generally harassing these migrant women, like around the area. Now, what is he doing? He's fixing visas, and someone else who is in me could easily speculate that he asserts control over these women because he's involved in this human trafficking scam, effectively, and can just knock on the door and be like, I want, he wants to use them, basically, right? For his own gratification. And because they are under his thumb in some way, as in, this is how prostitution and pimping and human trafficking works, right? I've got power over you. This is off the books. This is all subterranean. And you're dealing with amoral predators, effectively. So he's coming over, bullying, harassing, asking for money, sexual favor, all this kind of stuff, right? I'm embellishing a bit there, but the story pretty much goes as far as that. The rest is speculation about something else. But the scene is there. And what it turned out, the articles after he got done for the sexual assault said, the file was sent to the DPP, who later dropped this complex case, right? They dropped the case. Now, what you have there is, of course, in my view, treason, right? It's not just because I'm against migration, but that's treason. I mean, if you're letting hundreds of people into a country who may or may not, let's assume not, would have been able to come to the country. If you've let hundreds of people in that we know of or speculate on, who could have come into the country and claim benefits, and if they do, which many of them will, that could end up being hundreds of millions, literally, over years, lifetimes. And generally, it's just treason to the guards, it's treason to the country, like legally, straight up, right? Obviously, it's some form of treason or neglect. I mean, he's meant to be a guard, right? This is meant to be a good thing and have responsibility. And he's running instead of being a guard, he's being a human trafficker with the badge, right? And he's all but caught dead to rights, it would seem, by colleagues, by authorities somewhere up the chain. But when it gets to the top of the chain, they decide it's too complex a case and they drop it. Now, it wasn't too complex a case when, some young fella in Citywest uses a hammer to bang in a window and someone throws in a match and burns out an empty van. They'll go CSI Miami mode with that, right? And they'll throw the book at all these people like they did with the O'Connell Street riots, you name it. Excuse me. They will go full on with that stuff. It would have been very easy. I'm no guard, I'm no detective, right? But look, if you have this guy 95% of the way there dead to rights on this, you have probably all sorts of guards who are seething in the area, or different people who are going, I want this guy nailed, right? And they probably have certain amounts of evidence and anecdotal evidence, and all you would have to do is seize every device he's ever had, find the connection to the other guy, who's the fixer, what's the whatever it's called, find the web location, whatever, track it all down, open it up, unfurl the whole thing, find his connections to other guards in the country maybe who are doing similar things. See, because I always only got the idea of the other guy. And it opens up this whole Pandora's box, a whole network, right, waiting there to be unraveled. Now you could say that's what they should be doing. But of course, because that's what would happen if they pulled on the thread, that's why they dropped the complex case. Because according to them, they would go, because the real subterranean reality is from the very top. They're not prosecuting him because ultimately they want that to be happening. It's meant to be happening. The whole country runs on effectively human trafficking. I mean, that's what mass migration is at some level, even on the most innocent version of human trafficking. So it runs on all that. So, I mean, they're not going to do that. The same goes for this girl arriving at Citywest. They will say, this man did something bad to this girl, and that's what it is, and it's a crime, and crimes are crimes, and they're bad, and he will get X amount of years in jail and all that. What they won't do is say they pull on the thread and go, we'll have your phone and whoever the fuck you were talking to and all the rest of you and all the Irish ones involved, and we'll take it all the way to the top, right? And we'll pull it all the way till the jumper is pulled out entirely. And we'll see it all, we'll survey it, we'll pick through it and say, this is about a lot more than one crime, right? This is about a lot more than that. And that's the key detail that hatchlings want to pretend isn't going on. And they'll say, that's a very interesting theory, Garrod. You might have some tidbits here and there. You've mentioned the guard in Leitrim, you've mentioned this and that, you've mentioned the other, but who's to say this all unifies to a grand theory? Show me the Harvard reference source to say that that is or isn't true. It doesn't exist. I mean, last Trugale mentioned the UCD report, obliquely mentioned or alluded to some of this stuff, but only obliquely, right? If we had real NGOs, if we took over the state tomorrow, right, and you and I were given sort of carte blanche at the top of some investigative organization where it's like you have policing authority, you have whatever it's called, like when they bust up gangs and so, you have a very, very strong set of rights to sort of to bust these things up. And that'll include cyber surveillance and all the usual tools that actually currently are available to guards when appropriate. And this would be an appropriate case. You can take where there's proven crimes and start pulling at the threads and unravel the whole thing if you want. It would be piss easy, right? Because we all know what's going on. And if with phones and with money tracking and with CCTV and with all the rest of it that we have, and you bring people in and you interrogate them and you do all the rest of it, and you start tracing it all back, and there's no holds barred. It doesn't matter how high it goes. It doesn't matter who it affects. It, none of that. But it'll be a wide-scale investigation. That would be serious stuff, right? And you'd get back to what you would get back to ultimately is the whole asylum industry. What you would discover at the end of that is you would say, it seems like this is one, as I said years ago, the asylum industry, right? What you would discover is the whole thing right up to the very top level, international level, governmental level, the whole thing is absolutely filthy. And it's almost designed to facilitate all of this crime, abuse, trafficking, exploitation. And that's what it's there for. It's there, and it's a taxpayer subsidized, effectively, human trafficking racket. It's also got to do with population replacement and financialization, all this other stuff, but in a very direct sense, it's a human trafficking hub, right? All of these people are there to be used, exploited, weaponized, you name it, and this is where we get back to the story of the girl somehow gets out to Citywest. Now, if this asylum seeker is staying in Citywest and she is under the care of Tusla and she is 10 years old, right? You know, how does she get in touch with this man? This is the obvious question, right? Which, like I say, that's the first question where if you said, we'll pull that thread all the way and see how far it goes. If you took that all the way, you'd get very far. But let's just take the first question. How does she get in touch with him? I mean, I go back to my original theory. People being online. Could it be more organized than that? Could it be more organized than a girl is just exposed online or sort of available to be communicated with and all that online? I don't know. But the point is to say, anyway, I might be repeating myself, that is that she's under state care and this guy is in a state-sponsored human trafficking racket / facility, and the two things collided in full public view. However it got out, the amount of these that don't get out, that they're kind of kept on the QT. The other thing as well is how many girls go in there and get groomed for a while, and maybe they drift away from it at some point and never sees the light of day. Like, it never even gets reported. A lot of these girls think they're great. They might think they're young, they're rebellious, they're seeking attention, and that's how grooming obviously works, right? Where you have no real parents, or your parents are struggling, you're struggling, you're in state care, you are rebellious, and this could apply to a young boy or a young girl, right? How many of us, when we were kids, when we were, let's say, I don't know, 12, right? You might have smoked a few cigarettes, you might have drank a few cans or something like that, and in a bush somewhere. But what if with an older sibling or someone else's older sibling, you ended up in a car or driving to a party and everyone there was 19 or 20 or 20 in their 20s, and you know, they're passing drugs around like weed and drink, and they're all grown, and let's take it in a male context, right? And they're all, you just think they're so cool, right? And you're maybe having an identity crisis, and you want to feel like you're respected by these older people, and that they want you there, and that they like, if you're a lad, if you're 12 and you end up smoking a joint with a bunch of 20-year-olds or something, and they're slapping you on the back and all this, and your biggest desire might be to say something and for them not to think it's cringe, but to actually laugh and give you a slap on the back, and you go, oh yeah, I did it, right? Now, what if it's a girl in the same position, a bit vulnerable, all their other teenage things, identity crisis and all the rest, but these men are, you know, acting nice, right? Oh, we can get you a phone, we can get you cans, we can get you whatever. But then she also has something they want, to put it bluntly, in that they're predators. They're looking at her like a piece of meat. And of course, there might be the leaning into that. Oh, well, I'm very special now because they like me that way or something. That's the toxic brew, right? That's happening. And of course, if she can get in and out, back and forth with these people, and they're doing that, and everybody's looking the other way, and these people come from the countries they come from, like I said, stack up all the stuff I previously said. Think of how toxic a situation that is, and how many of them come and go thinking they're great, thinking they're very validated or something like that, in some way, with these grown men. And it kind of happens and comes and goes, and nothing ever comes of it. Nothing's ever said. I'd say for every story that they were rioting in Citywest for, there's hundreds of cases of that never see any light of day. Very, very common. Let's ban Jeff. I've got a botherer in the chat. I don't know how to get rid. Oh, it's a Twitter. I'll just ignore it. I don't really care. I just happen to see that. But yeah, it's And here's the other problem with politically in the aftermath of it, right? So we had the riots, we get the idea there. Um, the the troll here says you'd want to start thinking about having a family, or I don't know if they're talking to me. I'm like going, I have one. I don't know. What's it called? Is very bad for this. Like it's StreamYard. You can't actually just control the chat very well from here. Anyway, I'll just get off it so I can ignore it. So there's someone spamming up there. It's annoying me. But the problem is that we all saw what happened. I think most people with common sense know all this background I've been talking about. We all get it. We're not hatchlings, right? And that's the reason why from day one, if someone says, do you want 50 Algerian, Nigerian, Egyptian, Indian, Afghani, Somali, sorry, all those countries, you want a bunch of those men moved into your town, just like staying in effectively like a barracks indefinitely with each other, you'd go, no. And what the hatchling says is, why? They're fleeing this and that and the other. And you go, yeah, but I'm worried for my daughters. And they go, oh, what? Some sort of trope or whatever? There's no reason why they'd be any worse than anyone else. This kind of shit. This is what we were trying to say from the start, which is that, look, it's a long story. If we have to explain things that are intuitively obvious to any decent, normal, intelligent person, any normal person, and that's how they end up confusing people. They confuse normies out of saying the reality. I've kind of gone into it a bit. I'm kind of free to talk about these things a bit. So I can just kind of skip through it. But if you're beholden to political correctness because of your life, your work, your this, your that, or whatever, and because you don't, and I'm not trying to lord it here, but I sit around pondering these things quite a bit, or I've been at this for a while and stuff. So I'll kind of have it teased out. And then the key thing is that not being beholden to PC correctness, political correctness, I mean. I just kind of say it realistically. But if you're afraid of PC and you haven't quite got it all worked out, the words precisely for all these unnecessarily complicated ideas you have to put out, and someone says, so what are you saying? You end up backing away or just saying, I don't know, and that's what happens. But those people all who were initially saying, well, we're worried about our women and our daughters and all that kind of stuff, they were absolutely, their instincts are totally right. They don't need an hour like me to flesh it out. They just know that intuitively. We all know that. And then it starts happening, or it's been happening the whole time. But we see Citywest. We also had the Ukrainian boy, 17. I mean, what could be more? That's the thing. These things have stacked up in the last week or two, these events. I don't know his name. It's a Ukrainian name. I forget it. Sorry. But he came here from Ukraine, possibly avoiding conscription. And he gets into this horrible center, again, run by one of these outfits. So if you thought I was talking about Good Care Limited with their fake vetting and their evangelist, pastor, weird leader, or whatever, African gangster, in my view, and I'm just talking about one thing or whatever, well, a Ukrainian gets stabbed 100 times in his eyes, gouged out 3 days after getting here, and by a Somalian in this house, right? How many of these houses do you walk by in a city or a town or whatever where you go, you look in, you don't see a family. You're going to so many properties that are out from so many different contracted agencies and so many different things. You go, I don't know what's going on anywhere anymore, right? So some random house somewhere is under some bullshit contract thing that's meant to be iPass, but it's iPass contracting it to someone else who contracted to someone else, and ultimately it's just gangsterism, right? And exploitation, and state sponsored, big money. And they have this facility where there's a bunch of young fellas from all of different parts of the world staying in this house. God knows what they're doing. Are they taking drugs? Are they not? I don't know. They're not in some loving, highly professional care scenario, obviously, right? They're in some half dingy rental somewhere, possibly with some carer who themselves is, like going for a drive for a few hours and coming back and, falling asleep with their phone, and who knows, right? They're under 24-hour care in this dodgy rental somewhere under some literal gangster who's paying some other friend of theirs who's an Indian or whatever. Anyway, they're in this horrible underbelly, subterranean underbelly that RTE doesn't tell us about. But when someone gets stabbed 100 times in the eyes get gouged out, it sort of leaks accidentally through the story. So it's one of these. And then we have Citywest. And you start putting all of this together. And those are the only ones, those are the ones that get out because a girl was raped and a man was stabbed 100 times and his eyes gouged out, a Ukrainian child, effectively, a young man. Just what a horrific sort of country this has become, right? And so when the hatchling tells you, I don't know what you're talking about, I mean, this and that happens, but things happen in all circumstances and everything's grand. It's like, no, these things are just things that represent a whole iceberg. We have so many dodgy organizations, so many gangsters, so many bits of exploitation. And all you need to do is go to Dublin. I mean, it's all over the country, but just walk up Gardiner Street, walk around Mountjoy Square, go down Parnell Street, go down O'Connell Street, just walk around. And if you're not some hatchling and paid to pretend otherwise type of person, you don't have to go through any of the doors. You don't have to break through these people's phones and investigate it all, which I would love to do. Even without any of those powers, you just got two eyes in your head and you're walking around. You don't have to be a genius to go, this place is fucking filthy. And the whole country is too. And it's all centered around this migration, care, homes, elder care, child care, Tusla care, right? As Suzanne Delaney said, I use the word care very loosely. Care. And then the asylum industry itself, that whole world, the healthcare thing where you have baby Pepper Denny-san or whatever, the Fine Gael politician, who is effectively, allegedly, some would speculate, running something akin to a human trafficking employment agency, getting Indians over from India to work in nursing here, but of course taking a cut, and another state agency gives them a cut, and they go on, and then they work for suppressed wages, effectively, and the Irish nurses leave, and the whole standards drop, and it's just one big horrible, abusive human trafficking grift, and the Indian TD or whatever he is involved in a grift against like his own people. He doesn't give a shit. It's just pure Mad Max tier nasty exploitation, and there's no counterforce to any of this stuff. There's no, all the RTE you watch where Heather Humphreys is dancing around or whatever, and it's RTE and it's Diarmuid Bannon's doing up a house, and what's Maura Duran saying about omelets and all this kind of stuff, and an NGO has said this and that and the other. That whole fucking world, right? That whole society, the conversation you were allowed to have in polite society, it's all fake. You know what I mean? We have this massive, massive subterranean scandal involving all of this stuff. And the amount of abuse would probably put, would make the clerical abuse scandals of old look relatively minor, right? Would make them look smaller scale is what I mean, right? Obviously there were horrific things in their own cases, but would make it look less widespread, because this is so everywhere. So anyway, I've made my point there. I'll just see if I have some notes. I wanted to talk about Catherine Connolly and everything, but I actually would be here for like the next 4 hours if I wanted to kind of get to a lot of stuff. Here, look at me checking notes. Ezra Levant, that's to do with the riots. The UCD report, yeah, I mentioned that already. As I have here, I'm sorry to like note read, but you know what I mean? I've been talking a while. This whole thing of like fake communities. So, you know, this whole thing of like, there was one of them with Citywest recently, and I've talked about this endlessly for years, covering the asylum stuff, the town battles in towns between people and the state. Is that what you would have every time? What you would have every time is, just a sec, is it's one of the most surreal things I've witnessed in my adult life. Underrated reality about Western society, Irish society, is the phenomenon of the fake community. So your town is all against the asylum centre. They're a bit terrorised by the media and political correctness. They're all against it. To a man, they're all against it. They voted 99% against it. They're all against it, right? We don't want our daughters in danger. We don't have the facilities, blah, blah, blah. They're all against it, and they all want to oppose it tooth and nail. And they put up barricades and they say, they're not coming in here, la, la, la. And then on the news is some local who is either living there but a blow-in, or not even from there, and in very rare cases is from there, but just is an extreme ideologue who has former dealings with NGOs. They're constantly going in for grants to work with the Equality Town Group and all this kind of stuff. And they end up on the news in the Irish Times speaking for the town. So what they're doing is on one hand speaking for the town, and on the other hand monitoring the town. They're in the local Facebook groups, they're screenshotting everything. And so it's this sort of terror intelligence operation going on, state funded, intentionally designed. It was called the Friends of Community, right? Friends of the community, friends of asylum seekers. And these people would be all over the media. And so what you effectively have is this kind of cloned parallel community, right? Which the real community, in like the literal sense of the term, the actual community, they hate that person. They completely disagree with that person. And yet that is the person who is being spoken to as the person for the community. So a literal fake community. And there was one recently from Citywest. And before long, you'll have Citywest Healing Group or whatever. Let's heal, let's come together or whatever. And it'll be this NGO connected person or whatever. And they'll be basically just there to dissolve, terrorize, misrepresent, all the rest of it. They'll basically do the government's bidding and act for the community as the person. So you have fake communities, and then we have with this a fake election where Maria Steen would have been a very, very pale interpretation of some of the nationalist grievances we have. A very pale, very milquetoast, but we'd have taken it as an avatar, as scraps, right? Her, because we think, we sort of trust her and she's okay, they wouldn't even give us that. So we have this fake election, like just a completely fake election where I'd say about 50% out of the country just don't have representation. What else do we have? Fake media. So what I'm saying now, no big deal or whatever, right? Just some guy streaming. But what I'm saying now, I don't think I've said anything. I haven't come out and said we need to do any crazy illegal thing. And I'm not saying slurs. I'm not saying anything too crazy, right? I'm also being unbothered about it. I'm just speaking about it like I see it, right? I think it's probably a pretty decent representation of some of the concerns people have, some of the frustrations and the worldview people have about the situation, like why people are angry, why people are annoyed, why people feel disenfranchised. And I've no big interest to speak in the media, right, on TV, but I'm just saying, someone else, someone like me, right, someone saying things like this. You would imagine in a situation like Citywest or any of this, like that's been going on over and over again. It's Newtown, Mount Kennedy, it's Ballyogan, it's Coolock, it's Dublin, it's Rosscray, it's Drum, it's Clonmel, it's on and on and on. And every time you turn on the media and there's 5 people, right? And it's Niamh whatever, a blondie 29-year-old. And then there's some other guy in a jumper and he's 52. And there's some other guy and some other guy and some other guy. And they're having this conversation among each other. They're saying, what we need is to do this and do that. And we need to really challenge some of these preconceptions, these ideas about people coming in and about the idea of crime being on the rise when actually it's not really, and this, that, and the other. They bring all their little talking points to the table. And you're kind of going, this is a fake conversation. I mean, you don't have someone like, okay, the conversation is apparently about the grievances against these asylum centers and the crime and everything else. I mean, the only reason you're having this conversation is because Citywest happened. Like it wasn't a riot and a online storm with global attention about some liberal universalist open borders people expressing a grievance. It wasn't call it a left wing or a liberal open society grievance that happened. So why are they all talking? I don't get that. Why are they talking about that? Obviously, you should have a bunch of people like me, right? I wouldn't love it to do it, right? But you name it, a couple of pundits, right? Michael McCarthy, Keith Woods, this, that, and the other. Have people on. And not only like, oh, there should be one of them in it. So in a group full of open society sort of people, liberals, establishment, Fine Gael, Social Democrats, whatever. It shouldn't be that, oh, you have 6 of them and you allow one of us on. It shouldn't be, obviously shouldn't be like, it should be probably the other way around. It should be you have 4 people who are speaking about against the centres and against all of this. And then maybe 1 or 2 people to moderate it, to take the alternative view. Like, given that the story is about the grievance against asylum centres and migrant crime and all that, you think there'd be about 4 of them. I mean, that's not me being biased because I want that and that's my interest or whatever. That's just like, let's just be objective. Let's say we're aliens. Let's say we're from Japan and we're just totally uninvolved. We're just looking on. That's just how you would say, isn't that what a media conversation would look like? But you don't get that. So you have fake media, not just like fake news, oh, they're a bit liberal, but it is an entirely gaudily, outlandishly, completely fake clone of a conversation that is totally detached and separate and devoid of any involvement with reality that's actually going on. So we have fake communities, fake media, fake elections. I just wanted to mention that the fakeness of everything versus the reality that's going on is just intolerable and unsustainable, I'd say. It's not about one incident. I've mentioned that. The clerical abuse comparison. This is my list, right? The cost of living crisis, of course, that comes into it as well. It's not as important as a 10-year-old girl getting sexually assaulted, allegedly. But it's related, right? In that people are so angry. Like, I won't go on about this because it's just almost trite. We all know it. But like, the average semi-D in Dublin now is going for 610 grand. Utilities in Ireland, something I saw recently, have gone sky high. They were already pretty high relative to a lot of the world, but they've gone really, really high. There's reasons for that are basically, I mean, effectively state policy is responsible, kind of, right? This is a tangent, but bear with me. Now we're meant to have, the whole reason for all this migration and open society and stuff is meant to be for a GDP, right? Now, utilities are some of the most expensive in the world in Ireland. I think electricity is second only to Bermuda. And I saw this like Ben Norton tweet about this, where China, despite having maybe some lower incomes, will have subsidized electricity. It'll either be subsidized, or in Russia it's really cheap because they have a lot of it, but in countries that don't, they just subsidize it. They take money from one place, put it in another, so that people can just turn on their heat, turn on their lights, live their lives, keep things cheap for the basics. Maybe you have to scrimp more on your elective consumer choices, but your basics should be locked in. That really is the responsibility of the state, ultimately, right? Like a basic starting responsibility, right? As in a raison d'etre, if you think about it, right? And that's really worth thinking about, specifically that idea. But they do that in a lot of the world. I see in Cairo, utility prices are way lower, right? And I know they have a different economy and all that, but a lot of the world countries go out of their way to subsidize it because people need that ultimately. You can rejig the economy and move things around, but you have to have that, right? You have to. And in Ireland, that's not the case. And people are crying out for a cost of living measure, which they did once, and they won't do it again, even though we've the biggest GDP, fastest growing economy in the world, apparently. So we're meant to be like the tech version of Qatar, right? We're meant to have money pissing out everywhere. But in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, their version of our multinationals, which is oil, same thing, which is just kind of money pouring out, right? Apparently, some form of money. And that's what they tell us. But in those countries, they barely even pay bills, right? That's the deal. Hey, we've got all this funny money, so like we're subsidizing all you natives, basically. These basic things like fuel and electricity are almost dirt cheap. We'll just make it so. But in Ireland, they're some of the most expensive in the world, and we have one of the biggest economies in the world, whatever that is. And they won't even do something so simple as say, hey, we'll give you 5% off it. We'll knock 5% off your bills or something like. They won't even do that. So it's just kind of attack from every angle where nothing makes sense. Nothing is legitimate. Where people go, so I pay 600 grand for a house in Dublin. I'm pillaged with bills. They're all over the place. And the government turns around. This is the point I wanted to get to about raison d'etre of state, right? Is that they say, Micheál Martin, or one of them, will say, well, we're not going to come in and we're not going to do a Qatar or China or Russia or one of these countries where we effectively pay the majority of the bills. Like we keep the prices low. We interfere with the model. We control it so that it's cheap because that's our job, right? If you go to Micheál Martin or one of these, they'll kind of shrug, as they will with house prices, and say, well, that's kind of not really our job. That's some function of market, of, hey, that's life, of that's part of our great economy, which is twisted. They'll actually tell you that it's sort of a sign of how good things are. But ultimately what they're saying is, well, the house prices, it's terrible and we should change it. But at essence, if you press them on it, they'll go, well, it's not our responsibility as a state to literally just straight up intervene and make it so, make the prices cheap, do whatever we have to do to fundamentally make it less scarce or cheaper or state housing or whatever it is. It's not really our responsibility. I mean, you all just exist in this like market, this harsh marketplace. And with the high electricity bills, oh yeah, they have gone up, but I mean, we didn't put them up. But it's kind of like, well, if your responsibility isn't managing who comes into the country, and if your responsibility isn't deporting people who you yourself say are not meant to be here, have been declined, and your responsibility is not really to make sure energy prices are cheap so that we have relatively abundant and available fuel and electricity without having to worry about it and all the rest of it, utilities. And it's not your responsibility for houses not to be 600 grand for a standard semi-D. The question I come back to is, well, what the fuck is your responsibility? So exactly, okay? Tell me, is it to suggest to kids that being gay is the coolest thing in the whole world, or how racist we all are, or more women in the workplace, which a lot of women would like the opportunities to stay at home. They voted, they reaffirmed a referendum last year in large numbers to say that women should have the right, or people, I don't know, women, I think, should have the right, if they want to stay at home with their kids and should not be forced out of economic necessity to do otherwise, if that's their choice. That was actually reaffirmed in the Constitution. And yet you're trying to get women out to work as a value, as if they're all girl bosses or something, when in reality, women, men too, but a lot of women, mothers with cooking, cleaning, working, taking kids to childcare, their own health issues, whatever it might be, the stress of finances and stuff like that, are run ragged. Men and women alike, right? Run absolutely to the wall, driven to the wall. You're talking about women in the workplace. You're talking about LGBT, trans in schools is great. You're taking responsibility for all that. You're taking responsibility for multi-million euro asylum centers, which come at huge political cost, which require enormous logistical capacity, obviously. Policing, you can have 300 odd guards, or I don't know how many hundred, right? Half the guards in Dublin down in full riot gear, helicopters overhead. I mean, you can do a lot, right? And you are doing a lot, but that's what you're doing. That's what you're taking responsibility for. That seems to be what your actions are. But when we say the utilities are too high, the house prices are too high, that migrant shouldn't be here, you say, what? You don't say, oh yeah, I know I'm trying to get those to be really cheap. Here's what I'm doing. Bear with me, but we genuinely are trying. They go, well, it's not really on us to make it cheap. It just is what it is. That's the way the market contracts and all that work. It comes back to the question of state legitimacy, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't want to go too far with my claims here, right? Keep it legal and polite, because that's all I care about is legal, peaceful, safe, constitutional, free and fair discourse in a battle of ideas in the open marketplace of discourse, right? But state legitimacy, really sort of starts to come into question, would you not say? Where you look around you, left, right, and centre, the average person in Citywest who paid a fortune for their house, who's paying another 40% back on interest again to a bank, who did everything so that they could have their semi-D in their house and their kids and live their life. And now they're being, I mean, let's just be real. Like, I don't want to, they're being raped, right? In one sense or another. I know that's crass, right? So, sorry, it's inappropriate in a sense. But like, you have these little girls being trafficked into these centers, and then you have these people giving every last drop of their blood, let's say just being exploited, right? Financially, in their lives, their time. The husband and the wife both having to work 7 to 7, drop their kids to before school, after school, all this kind of stuff, just to pay this mortgage, just to pay these utilities, just to pay these gouged shopping prices and all the rest of it. And then they look in at this center and they go, those lads are all in there for free. They're not even meant to be there. That guy wasn't meant to be there, and he's there for free. He wasn't meant to be there under my definition in the first place, but even under Jim O'Callaghan's definition, wasn't meant to be there for the last 6 months, and yet he is there, right? And let's be real as well. When these guys leave the centers, they're not going to be in the center forever, and they're not going to say, when they're on their last day in the center, say, thank you for approving me for asylum. Now I will go get a fucking 35k a year job and try look for a rental on Daft or get a mortgage out. Right? No, they're going to just sit there and say, my mental health, can't find a job, speak English, whatever. And they're just going to get put into some new bill somewhere and bring over their 4 family members and all the rest of it. That's the idea, right? So these people in Citywest or in Sagart are looking at that and just going, this is impossible to tolerate. This is intolerable. You have this going on one hand. Then you have the girl going in getting allegedly sexually assaulted. And we know this is a statewide, covered up, effectively human trafficking racket. All forms of care are turning into abuse, effectively. The terms care and abuse are becoming pretty much synonymous, and exploitation. And you look back to the state with their little protestations about don't spoil your vote and don't riot and don't complain. We have great GDP and we have a constitution and our forefathers died for our liberal democracy, all this shite, right? And you go to Jim O'Callaghan and he says those rioters will be smashed and harassed and chased to the end of the earth and all that. And you go, well, why aren't you chasing why aren't you chasing that guard who stamped hundreds of visas? Why didn't you chase him to the end of the earth? And by the way, how many other people are here after not leaving on their deportation order? And what are you going to do about it? Why are you harassing us? Do you know what I mean? How dare you you're castigating us. This is just, no, this all has to stop. And that's the difference with Citywest. I feel like there is a turning point there where we have to realize, again, it's not about an individual crime. And also, it's not about you castigating us anymore. We're done. You're not castigating us, right? Because you're not doing anything. The whole reason that you get to be up there and pontificate and have state power and sovereignty and a monopoly on violence, and of course, I wouldn't contest that, right? They're the police and we're good citizens and all that. But hypothetically, the whole reason why you have a monopoly on state force and on authority and ultimately violence, right, with the police and the army and all that, and law and jail and dishing out, collecting taxes and all the rest of it, the whole reason you have a monopoly on that has to be based on something. There has to be a social contract there, right? And then even you get to voting, they say, well, you have the right to vote. Well, apparently we fucking don't, right? Because you excluded all the candidates and we didn't give us an option. So it's starting to wear very thin, is what I would say. Very, very, very thin indeed. The raison d'etre for you to exist. So I don't know what you're castigating us for. That's just what the message I would have for Jim O'Callaghan is that stop the cap effectively, right? Stop the bullshit. And we're not going to tolerate it. We're just not. And I'll be commenting, and I'm peaceful and legal and all that. But let's just say the country will not tolerate much more, right? Will not. And because I only advocate for peaceful and legal discourse in the free and fair marketplace of ideas, that wouldn't be my appeal. Start governing according to some semblance of a social contract, or get out of the way. Because if you don't, the people of Ireland will put you out of the way, peacefully and legally. It's just, I mean, maybe I'm being dramatic, but it's unsustainable. You look at a normal country like China, like Russia, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like you name it, right? Oh, Saudi Arabia are Muslims or whatever. Look, they're all different, but they're in essence normal. They have a basic social contract with their citizens about identity, about economics, about way of life, about social order, about safety, about prosperity and well-being, all these kind of things. They're not perfect countries, but there's some semblance of an attempt at a social contract between government and the governed, between rulers and ruled. There has to be, and history tells us this. And Ireland is like an experiment of an anti-society, an anti-polity, effectively an unbridled tyranny. And that's what you see boiling over in Citywest. It's not about just there was a sexual assault. Hey, a guy in Donegal sexually assaulted. Look, something happens in a home. I don't know all these individual stories, right? But like, it's like a case where someone robs your car or whatever. If there's some industrial institutional thing behind that made that thing easily preventable, and it wasn't an individual criminal doing a terrible thing, then absolutely I'm open to look into that. But that's the key difference, is that this isn't just an isolated crime. It effectively, TLDR, the crime opens up a Pandora's box of everything beyond just the horrendousness of the crime of one man doing something to one girl. It's representative of all of it. And that's why that riot happened. And I don't promote or condone any of that. But let's just say, as a, I don't know, call me clairvoyant, call me just a good analyst, right? But let's just be real. They can bring 300 guards down and quell this thing, but it doesn't go away. You know what I mean? It's not going anywhere. They have double-sized fences up now, and they have those up in Newtown, Mount Kennedy, and they have them up probably in Ballyogan and all these places, all these fortresses. But at the end of the day, that only goes so far, and people are getting more and more angry. And just, I say this like unironically, if the government just turned around and governed responsibly, I would be like, grand, perfect. It's unnecessary. They could just deport all those people. They could just take control of the economy properly to actually run reasonably normal for people, normally. And things would be grand. Most of us would go back to being switched off normies, just get on with life, and that's grand or whatever. Most people want that, but it's getting to a point where it's not. The bargain isn't worth it for people anymore. Hey, just switch off, check out, live your life. The state is encroaching on that in ways that are hard to fathom. Anyway, I'm going on too much. I was going to talk about Conley and all that, but obviously it's gone too long, and I know I'm starting to just ramble now. I'm just starting to ramble, so I'll stop. So I think I've talked about. I wanted to get that off my chest. This is just purely about Citywest and the aftermath of that. This whole thing of, not to go on about it again, but like these lectures from Justin Kelly, the Garda Commissioner, the new one, and these lectures from Jim O'Callaghan, lectures from these random talking heads in the media and NGOs. It's just like, it's sort of almost surreal that in the aftermath of something like Citywest, the conversation that they have is a lecture of us after what happened, right? She was only 10, a 10-year-old girl, right? One of our girls, effectively. It's okay, right? Oh, she's not your girl. She's not your people or something. Yes, she is. Okay. That matters. That does matter. And to be honest, it would be true for any human being. The Ukrainian boy, he's Ukrainian, he's not Irish. I don't think a boy should be getting stabbed in the head 100 times, stabbed 100 times and eyes gouged out. I don't think these situations, it's not random. These situations are obviously, this environment is set up, right? Clearly. I don't think that should be happening. And you're lecturing me. You're lecturing us, like the Irish people. Whether it's Catherine Connolly or Heather Humphreys or any of these other bullshitters, I'm just so sick of the fake. These talking points, these canards, these sort of things they just say over and over and over again. Lessons will be learned every time. We're reviewing it. We're looking into it. You don't need to review it. We all know what's going on. You know, it's just like a string toy you just pull and it says the same thing over and over again. It's like, how long do we keep doing this? And in this case, there was no caveat. A girl from Tusla over to a center. The guy was meant to be gone. All the details are in place. There's no more place to hide with the story. You know, like, so why are you lecturing us? Why is Micheál Martin lecturing us? Simon Harris, all of them. They should be on their hands and knees begging for forgiveness, legally and peacefully, right? Just discursively. They should be on their hands and knees in front of the country begging for forgiveness and for tolerance and promising immediate, real change right now. And they should be tripping over themselves to enact it. Not words, real. They should be tripping over themselves to go above and beyond what you or I would even ask for. That's what they should be doing. Like this, right? And yet they're lecturing us. Anyway, I'll go to a couple of super chats here. I'll go to those and wrap it up. We're all tired, I say. So we have Chinook 10, thank you, says, my dad watched his friend get groped by a teacher in primary school. Everyone knew it was happening, but they totally accepted it as okay. Not bad enough to lose my job, and simply didn't care. And that's exactly what's going on now. That's exactly what's going on. Here's another little tidbit, right? I was talking to a boomer, who I know, recently, and they said that she said she was at a thing the previous night with other boomers, right? And I mentioned Citywest because it's obviously on the brain. And I said, what do you make of this Citywest? Because she said they had been talking about the presidential election at this when they were all together socializing. And I said, oh, if they were talking about the presidential election, then they're obviously they're on Spit talking about the news, you know. Citywest riot had just happened the night before. So I was kind of saying, oh, like, that was obviously, like, did that get brought up? And she said, yeah, we brought it up when we were talking about it, but we were all asking each other, I mean, because they'd seen the riot footage, they'd seen the burning Garda van. And I said, what you make of that anyway? Doing a bit of research, focus grouping, and she says, well, we were all kind of asking each other, what is it? And I said, well, what do you mean, what is it? She said, well, I saw all the stuff there up in Dublin, and but we were all talking to each other, just trying to figure out basically why they were angry. Why is everyone throwing stuff, or what's going on? Did something happen or something? And it was like a chill came over me, going, oh my God, because I'm seeing it online going, okay, we all talk about how RT is biased and stuff, but to see it come out the other end like that, a disconnected consumer, you know, these boomers rely purely on media and radio, so they're a good test of, like, what are you getting into your brain, right? That they literally didn't even know, having obviously spent some time watching this unfolding riot and all the rest of it, and news coverage and talking heads and all that, and the discourse that was being had in that media was so lying by omission that they literally didn't even know, I'm not saying in detail, just at all, what had happened. So they'd had the radio, you know the way boomers are, the telly's on, the radio's on, they'd had that on all evening before they got together. And if one person hadn't heard it, you'd think the other person would have gleaned it somehow. But no, between all of them, they didn't actually know at all what the big fuss was about. Now, how the media are able to, by this sort of osmosis, somehow shear that off the story just kind of in a sense tells you everything you need to know about, like, okay, so how much is this being covered up? Like, at whether it's the Indian security guard, or whether it's the person who doesn't want to lose their 52 grand a year job or whatever, some sort of pencil pusher who's sort of in the middle, who has heard about what's going on, but like it's not convenient, wouldn't be great for their job to be running it up the flagpole too much, or whether it's the media lying by omission, literally, to a pack of boomers, talking about the far right and the dangers, and this van was blown up and these guards were put in danger, and it's a threat to our constitution and all this stuff. That they, in all that story, nothing came up about the 10-year-old girl who was allegedly raped by an African who was meant to leave the country 6 months ago and realistically shouldn't have been here in the first place, and is staying in a state-sponsored human trafficking center. None of that came into the conversation. So that's what we're dealing with in terms of, I mean, it makes the priest cover-up look tame and unsophisticated by comparison. Thank you. So T-Dog, 20 pounds funded by the Brits. Thank you. I'm just messing. My parents moved over to the UK in the early 70s. You couldn't wish to meet nicer people, but my mum made a point of saying there are plenty of gangsters back at home. I wish there was something we could all do to help, or we could do to help you lads. Well, I wish there was something we could do to help the United States and France and the UK, or, well, Britain and Australia and the rest of it. I mean, we're all in this together in a sense. It's not unique to Ireland, but do you know what's mad as well? They say, talk about legal and moral obligations. I'll finish up soon. But they talk about legal and moral obligations. We all know that's a meme. That's fake. That's just a fucking bullshit line, right? But the other thing they talk about is our economy would collapse, and like, or not even that, but if we're focusing exclusively on the asylum aspect of this whole debacle. And they say, well, we have legal and moral obligations. And you say, yeah, but you've national obligations as well. And like, what, that's bullshit. So just end the asylum program basically entirely and deport almost all of them. Could you just do that? And we'll, like, that's the beginning of a reasonable social contract. They say, no, we couldn't even, not only will we not do that, we're going to keep it going, liberalize it even more, piss in your face more. And we have to do it. Like, don't even give out to us. I'm only doing what I got to do. Like, we've got these legal obligations and all that. The Geneva Convention and the this and the that and the fucking Dublin Convention and the, La La Land Convention and all this bullshit, effectively. You go, yeah, but why don't you just tear that up and put it in the bin? Because you're meant to be our government. I mean, what's even going on? How does this kind of work at all? Like, legitimacy comes back to question, and sovereignty. You kind of go, well, who is sovereign? So who the fuck can I talk to? And they go, well, nobody really, but yet we're in power. And you go, yeah, but like, why don't you just chuck all that in the bin and say, fuck them all. You're my government, so you're going to answer to me. And we've all made it abundantly clear to you now. It's not even vague. We're crying out for this. So just bin it all. They go, well, internationally, we would be like sanctioned and stuff. You know what I mean? There's the EU stuff and there's this and there's that. I mean, the blow up of that would be our economy, our multilateral agreements. That would all, like, not only would we be in trouble with the NGOs for it, but like the banks could run on us. All sorts of like things could be weaponized against us and we could be tanked, and then you'd be coming back to us saying social services are kind of falling apart, or certain state coffers are drying up, and the knock-on consequences of that would be somehow bad as well, and all of that. And these are all unexamined assumptions that I don't buy into. But let's say we buy into it for argument's sake. Okay, we would be we'd receive international hostility, and all sorts of international arrangements would fall apart, and there'd be blowback, and they'd basically, through you representing our will, they would try to assassinate you as the government and a state, and bring our state such that it exists in its bad as it is. They try to bring take all that apart, cause problems. I feel like we're at a point where if a Lee Kuan Yew type figure came, as he used to do, say what you want about him. If an actual leader, not some sort of hologram type fucking vacant behind the eyes leader, but a genuine sovereign leader, a leader who said, I am responsible, I and we, a council, a leader, whatever, said, I'm responsible here, good, bad, and indifferent. I'm responsible. What I'm going to do is communicate to you honestly what's going on. No bullshit. Here's what it is. And they say, you're telling me you want me to end the asylum thing, reduce migration in general, deport a lot of the people who shouldn't be here, some reasonable amount or whatever, but like a huge reversal on all this stuff. And the asylum thing goes out the window, first and foremost. You want me to do that? And we say, yes, we do. And he says, there's all this blowback we could get. Like, we'd be in for a bit of a wild ride in other ways as a country, as a people. And I'm pretty sure most of us would say, fuck it, we ball, right? We'll do it. That sounds like a trade-off we're willing to make. We'll white-knuckle it, right? See what happens. And what it would rely on is that leader saying, okay, well, here's what's going to happen. We're going to introduce these policies. We're going to unwind all that. And every bit of communication we get internationally, I'm going to come back. I'm going to stand with you, the people. I'm going to come to you and tell me, or I'm going to tell you what position they're putting me in. So I'm being put in this position by the IMF. I'm being put in, I just got a call from this person in the EU. This is what they're telling me. They're going to hang us. They're going to do this and that. And you would say, as the leader, I have your back all the way if this is what you want me to do, but I need you to have mine, right? I need you to have mine, and I'll be completely transparent with you, and we're going to get through it together, right? As per your wishes, transparently, openly and honestly, and together. I'm pretty sure if you offered that wager to the Irish people, we would pretty much in a huge majority say, absolutely, let's do it. And if that happened, what would spiral from there is, with that being put out transparently to the Irish people, the whole world would be watching, the whole Western world. And as we do that, as the British government and Brussels and Wall Street, New York, Manhattan, Washington start putting pressure on us, and our leader comes back telling us everything, telling the whole world everything, I'm pretty sure you would have mass demonstrations in Washington, London, their own people at the gates, right? Rattling at the gates, demanding that their government stop. And it would actually be contagious, because they'd say, how dare you, those Irish people, as we saw with just a little small fracas in Citywest, the whole Western world looks on and beyond, looks on and says, good on them, good on the Irish. And they go, God, I wish we had that fire in our bellies. They might be the ones to save us all. And all this was somewhat exaggerated. We're not, it's just a van. It's just a protest. It's just online commentary. It's just a few horses. But even something like that is trivial, really, as that. A whole majority, I would say, of the Western world, of the people look on and say, in amazement and respect, in a sense, right? Now, if a national sovereign leader in Ireland said, you know what, we're going to go all the way and just unwind this peacefully, genuinely, but we're going to do it, and we're going to do it openly, and we're going to stand up against this international empire. And whatever happens, if someone gets assassinated, they do. And we're just going to do it all the way. In a sovereign fashion. Do you think the people of the United States and of Belgium and of Britain and all the rest of them would watch all that and let it, like, allow it? They would be going to their own government saying, we want that too. We want that too. It'd be a beacon, an actual beacon, a shining city on a hill and all that for the whole Western world. So the idea that our leaders, such as they're meant to be, sort of say, our hands are tied, we can't stand up for you like that. It's like, oh, you would have everything to work with if you were real. You actually could play chicken with the entire empire, I believe. But that's just, anyway, that's a little thought I had. Thank you for the chat there. Armchair Limerick Nationalists 20, thank you very much, says, thanks for the stream, Garrod. Spoiled my vote today. Media is a disgrace. Barely a further mention of the raped child. Hopefully the spoiled vote count will surpass Connolly. Well, I don't think it'll surpass Connolly, but I'd love if it surpassed Humphreys. But I just hope it's significant enough, I suppose. But look, I kind of supported Connolly in a way. This is actually a whole other stream. This has gone on, obviously, but I might talk about that in another night. Maybe we'll do a results stream tomorrow night. Do you know what? I'll do my best to do that tomorrow night. And I'll talk about why I supported Connolly, is sort of semi-ironic, but semi-legit as well reasons. But like I've leaned more into spoil the vote in the last couple of days when it became clear she was going to win either way. that's a whole other story. But I am happy with Spoil the Vote. It looks good. I do back it in a sense, as it is. And there's a cat somewhere here. But look, a large spoil vote is it's the whole game is delegitimization. Having a massive fortress around every plantation facility, the whole country knowing that it's totally dodgy. The government, all they have left is to lecture us about, almost like they're lecturing us about house prices, telling us it's great and telling us everything's in our imagination. That's delegitimizing. This election is delegitimizing. So a large spoiled vote, it is in some sense, definitely delegitimizing. Because, like I say, if the media is fake, the politicians are fake, the elections are fake, and the communities are fake communities. And then the prices just keep going up and up, and life becomes more unlivable for a lot of ordinary, decent Irish people. I mean, I don't see how over time that doesn't create a death by 1,000 cuts effect. So Spoil the Vote does add to that. So we'll see how it goes. Thank you. And Finolo Muraku 5 just says Emmanuel. Okay. Is that Emmanuel Godson? Our resident artist? I don't know. But thank you all the same. And everybody else in the chat, everybody watching tonight, and anybody after the fact, I appreciate you spending the time with me once again. Ihawa. See ya.